Hi everyone, and welcome back from the break. Is it okay like that with the microphone? Not yet. Thank you. So, maybe not. Inspired by the well-known 12th century metaphor of dwarves standing on the shoulders of giants, we wanted to explore the history of iron gall in corrosion at the University Library of Basel. As this image vividly illustrates, we can benefit from the experiences of our predecessors, perhaps making progress and seeing further, but only if we take the effort to climb onto their shoulders and draw insights and conclusions from the past experiences to shape our present actions and the future of our cultural heritage. So my colleagues and I went on a journey into the past, not just 10 years back, but as far as the traces of ink corrosion at the library have led us. We begin with an overview of the timeline. In an 1892 manuscript description, we read that the paper of this manuscript was corroded by ink in many places, making it difficult to read and requiring careful handling. The 1912 catalogue states that the mentioned codex was disintegrating due to ink corrosion. Documented on the inside of the front cover of the manuscript is the restoration carried out by the workshop of the Biblioteca Apostolica Vaticana in 1934. This is not recorded in the preservation department's protocols. Written records of bookbinding measures only begin with handwritten lists from the 1950s to the 80s. Among these, we find a 1973 entry for an ink-corroded object that was restored. More detailed forms follow into the 2000s, documenting, for example, wet treatment, laminating and smoothing of the paper, such as a letter affected by ink corrosion in 1991. In 2008, the department transitioned from bookbinding to conservation. With the arrival of the library's first conservator, Francesco Carminati, the condition assessments and documentation of measures were recorded in Excel spreadsheets, including the documentation of 4 categories for ink corrosion damage. Larger-scale conservation projects were also initiated with systematical dry cleaning, conservation packaging, mechanical stabilisation, and insertion of acid-free papers or silk papers to stop acid migration, also in cases of ink corrosion. In 2012, a qualitative and quantitative assessment of ink corrosion was conducted on a leather collection, raising broader cross-departmental awareness of the issue. Additionally, 14 sheets were treated against ink corrosion using the simmering method, which was documented both in writing and photographically. Since 2015, isolated mechanical ink corrosion damage has been stabilized using remoistenable tissues. In 2018 and 21, comprehensive random sample surveys were conducted across the entire manuscript collection. The results estimated that 600 to 720,000 sheets exhibited cracks and losses due to ink corrosion, while chemical treatment could be considered for another 1.7 million sheets. Only 24% of the sheets showed no signs of ink corrosion. Under the leadership of Lisa Dittmann, the current head of collection preservation, a development project from 2020 to 23 designed treatment processes for all ink-corroded objects. Starting in 2022, the first sheets were treated chemically and then mechanically using calcium phytate and calcium hydrogen carbonate, for us short CAFU treatment, after the standard protocol described by Hanner and Husmann. Since 2023, the current implementation project has been underway, including the Ink Lab, a team of book and paper conservators. The project team, spanning 7 departments, is dedicated to the systematic examination and treatment of ink corrosion across the entire historical handwritten collection of the library. We don't let them be. Depending on the extent of damage, the project's workflows include dry cleaning, mechanical stabilisation, using remoistenable tissues in inked areas, and chemical and mechanical stabilisation with the CAFU treatment. Every object undergoes cataloguing, digitisation, preventive measures, and for fragile items, restricted use of the original. In parallel, the development project continues to focus on quality control of our work, supplementing the CAFU treatment with prior or subsequent stabilisation using nanocellulose, upscaling the CAFU treatment in collaboration with an external partner, the Bürgerspital Basel, and integration of airflow drying into the wet treatments. What stands out during this journey through the timeline is, on the one hand, a shift from purely mechanical to also chemical treatment, as well as the change in scale. While in the past we only discovered a few isolated cases of ink corrosion treatments, the current project is a large-scale endeavor. What we can take away from this is the importance of thorough and long-term documentation of our decisions and measures, the importance of chemical analytical evidence of effectiveness, and the importance of long-term monitoring of our treatments and the treated objects. So after this race down the timeline, we now want to take a closer look at objects treated with different methods against ink corrosion. The oldest method we found in the collection is silking. A collection of religious songs from the 16th century is lined on both sides and fully covered with a type of gauze. The material of the fabric and the adhesive are unknown to us. The paper itself is in very poor condition, with an extreme number of cracks, losses, and brown stains caused by ink corrosion. It is evident that the brittle parts are held together only by the silking. On some pages, the ink appears to have smudged slightly when the adhesive was applied. Some fragments are not neatly positioned beneath the lining, and there are fillings made from an unknown material. As previously mentioned, this restoration is not documented in the conservation records. Only when we deciphered the note inside the front cover did we learn that it was not carried out at the University Library, but in 1934 at the Biblioteca Apostolica Vaticana in Vatican City. There are black and white photographs from 1978 of some pages of the manuscript, a security microfilm from 2010, and a digital copy was already created and published online 2013. We compared the old photographs with the current condition. The browning, cracks, and losses do not appear to have changed significantly, but of course this is difficult to assess from the photos alone. Mechanically, the sheets are very stable due to the silking, and handling is possible without material loss, although new cracks may form beneath the silking. The gauze is visually less obtrusive than expected, though the haptic quality is, of course, significantly altered. The misplaced fragments, fillings, and the fact that the paper edges were trimmed are less than ideal. Overall, however, it is likely that many fragments would have been lost and would not be preserved today without this intervention. The next method involves double or single-sided facing or lining, not with gauze, but with various types of paper. We found 3 objects that underwent this treatment. A German lectionary from the 15th century was restored in-house in 1973. It is lined on one or both sides with a paper over the text area, though the lining material and adhesive are unknown. There is a black and white digital copy from before 2009, in which the lining is already visible, particularly on one page where the lining paper was misplaced. A 19th century letter was also restored in-house in 1991. The protocol mentions wet cleaning, repairing, embedding, and smoothing. The lining is double-sided and full surface, with the lining material being rather shiny and slightly crackling. It seems that 2 different materials were used for the recto and verso sides. Neither the paper nor the adhesive is known. A 1717 letter from Johann Bernoulli was likely restored in-house, though the date and measures are not documented anywhere. The letter was lined on one side and fully covered, presumably with Japanese paper and wheat starch paste, though this is not confirmed. A digital copy of this letter was made in 2015. These methods of mechanical stabilization are also very stable and allow for safe handling. Comparing the old digital copies with the current condition shows no noticeable changes, neither in the losses nor in the browning. The linings are visually and haptically barely disruptive, depending on the type and thickness of the paper. One disadvantage is that future examination using multispectral imaging might be hindered by the lining paper. However, we were also positively surprised by the condition of restored objects in this case.
So I will continue with the so-called simmering method. In this process, paper damaged by iron gall ink is immersed in boiling water with adjusted pH at around 90 to 95 degrees Celsius, or boiling water is poured directly over the sheet. The idea is twofold. The high temperature prevents bleeding of water-soluble inks, and at the same time the hot water helps to release free iron ions from the paper matrix. Since the original sizing is lost during the process, simmering is usually followed by resizing. At the University Library Basel, we have a catalogue manuscript in which only some of the pages were treated this way. This gave us the rare opportunity to compare treated and untreated sheets side by side. The differences are clear. The simmered pages are lighter in tone. Their surface structure has also changed, so you can identify them by touch alone. Apart from that, we did not observe any further damage that could be linked to the treatment, and the treated pages appear stable. On the use of remoistenable tissue. At the University Library, many manuscripts were locally stabilized using this technique. It relies on Japanese paper that has been pre-coated with an adhesive. The adhesive can be reactivated later with a small amount of moisture, for example, by applying a gel. In the early years, we used wheat starch paste as a coating. Later, gelatin was introduced, which, regarding the literature, shows an inhibiting effect on iron-iron migration. Since 2020, a matting agent has been added to reduce the glossiness of the applied paper. This approach was first suggested by our colleague Alice Tran in her bachelor thesis in 2011. So, what did we observe? Overall, we were very satisfied. We did not find any cases where the stabilization had caused obvious secondary damage. In some cases, we could even compare digital images taken before treatment with the current condition. The changes were minimal. Only one manuscript appeared a bit darker and more saturated in color. It is the one showed on the screen. But this might just as well be due to the differences in photography. The big advantage of remoistenable tissue is the ease of handling. Thanks to the pre-coating, only a small amount of moisture is needed to activate the adhesive. Optical changes are usually visible, but they remain moderate and acceptable. Importantly, the tactile qualities of the paper are preserved much better than with simmering or with full surface lining, as the paper surface is only altered locally in the fragile areas. A particularly interesting case involved initials in a manuscript. These large letters were affected by ink corrosion and had developed cracks. They were stabilized with small, discrete pieces of coated Japanese paper. 8 years later, however, we observed that new cracks had formed within the already corroded areas not secured with the Japanese paper. This showed us that in such cases, stability has to come before aesthetics. Sometimes it is better to use a larger piece of Japanese paper, even if it's more visible, to connect the weakened areas securely with the surrounding healthy paper. Another interesting case is a manuscript with large darkened writings. Those have been stabilized with remoistenable Japanese paper. With the current project on microfibrillated cellulose, we might consider waiting with the stabilization of larger darkened areas. Otherwise, there is a risk of making future multispectral analysis more difficult. So, let us now turn to the currently applied CAFU treatment. Through international research and several projects, including the work by Hannah Huseman in 2008, this method has been studied in detail and is standardized. Its strength lies in the fact that the process is reproducible and that it allows the complexation of free iron ions. At the University Library, after chemical treatment, the sheets are mechanically stabilized with coated Japanese papers as mentioned earlier. When we look at the treated sheets in Basel, we can see that luckily many original features of the paper remain visible and interpretable. For example, deposits on the inclines such as blotting sand particles. They may be reduced, but they are not completely removed. Whereas slight creases sometimes disappear, as shown here in the left images. Strong folds, however, for example in letter documents, usually remain visible, especially under raking light, although they are reduced. In the early stages, we had to face some problems with cockling and distortions along the sheet edges. To address this, we started using extension strips in the drying stacks of every single sheet, which shift the drying boundary outward and help reduce edge deformation. Another phenomenon we noticed was the formation of new tiers or the enlargement of existing ones, as shown here in these two examples. This meant that some sheets required more reinforcements with Japanese paper than originally expected. Even so, the chemical stabilization achieved through CAFU is considered highly beneficial. In terms of color change, in most cases the differences are minor, similar to what we would expect from conventional washing. But for some inks we did observe a loss in color intensity, for example here, the number 19 nearly in the middle of the sheet. For certain blue inks, a color shift occurred during the calcium hydrogen carbonate bath, as with the number 3 shown here. In those cases, the text remained legible, but in rare situations the writing nearly disappeared, which can be seen here with the blue number 15 in the center that has almost totally gone after treatment. This reminded us the high importance of pre-treatment documentation at minimum in the shape of a pre-treatment picture. This brings us to the lessons we have learned by looking back at past treatments and reflecting on our current practice. First, in mechanical stabilization, stability should always come before aesthetics. Reinforcements should be large enough to connect the damaged areas securely to the surrounding stable paper. Second, we realize once again how important documentation is. Well-documented treatments are extremely valuable for future conservators. Today, we ourselves benefit from the careful records of past interventions, or we face the difficulties caused by gaps in them. And in our current work, we see the same. Pre-treatment photography is essential. Finally, a word about the ink corrosion project itself. While we can build on extensive international research and established standards, the project is still evolving. This allows further development and refinement. And the insights we gained while preparing the presentation will also help the initially named giant, which can also represent our project, to confront the mischievous dwarf hiding in the University Library's manuscripts, representing the free iron ions in ink-corroded paper. Thank you for your attention.